Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Sounds good.
Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Bob Gill. I am currently serving as the VP for Programming for the Worcester County Poetry Association. I want to thank you all for joining us for the next session of our Zoom into Poetry virtual poetry readings that we've been holding during the pandemic. Today we're really pleased to bring Oliver de la Paz as our featured reader. He'll read for a little while and then we'll have some time afterwards for Q&A if anyone comes up with a question. So hold your questions to the end and we will be sure to let you know when it's safe to do that. So let me read a quick bio here and we'll get started. Oliver de la Paz is the author of 5 collections of poetry. With his newest one, the book, The Boy in the Labyrinth from University of Akron Press. He also co-edited A Face to Meet the Faces, an anthology of contemporary persona poetry. He is a founding member and serves as the co-chair of the Kutiman Advisory Board. He's received grants from the NYFA and the Artist Trust and has been awarded 2 Pushcart Prizes. His work has been published or is forthcoming in journals such as Poetry, American Poetry Review, Tin House, the Southern Review, and Poetry Northwest. He teaches at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, go Worcester, in the low residency MFA program at PLU. Please mute yourselves and give a generous virtual clap for Oliver de la Paz.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Roger, and thank you to the Worcester County Poetry Association for hosting me. It's a real pleasure, and I am appreciative of all the folks who are in Zoom space, wherever you may be, to hear some poetry this afternoon, especially on a really kind of warm, humid day when you can be at the swimming pool or somewhere else. So much thanks, and I am going to jump around in some of my reading selections. I'm going to read some new stuff first, and then I'm going to go into some older stuff, read from the new book, just a couple poems, and then close with some newer work. So this is a newer poem, which is in the form of a pantoum, which is a form that has a series of repeating lines. And it's based off of an exhibit that was at the ICA. I'm not sure if it's still there. It was the When Home Won't Let You Stay exhibit. And it was specifically after the piece by Rina Saina Kalat's Woven Chronicle. So pantoum beginning and ending with thorns. Because of the way a border on a map twists into thorns, my father stood in line in a ruined country with ruined men. We were footnotes on charred parchment, the boundaries lost at the precipice of a war, shifting on the hour in spliced histories. My father stood in line in a ruined country with ruined men, and what for? Did he imagine the desert he would bring us to? At the precipice of a war, shifting on the hour in spliced histories, the call to leave home throbbed inside him, urgent pulses. And what for? Did he imagine the deserts he would bring us to, its thirsty and abandoned towns? There was a fire spreading within. The call to leave home throbbed inside. Urgent pulses crossed and uncrossed like tributaries on freshly inked maps. In thirsty and abandoned towns, there was a fire spreading within, so he took us away because the country was ruled by swords, which crossed and uncrossed like tributaries on freshly inked maps. And the guns would sound all night like feast days of saints. He took us away because the country was ruled by swords and men emblazoned with chevrons and pins, and the guns would sound all night like feast days of saints, but really there was more silence. there was worry and fear, and men emblazoned with chevrons and pins would draw black X's over places they'd conquered. Really. Then more silence, then worry and fear. The flies would sing their hymnals in procession around the dead, the black X's over places now conquered, maps of provinces, cities, family lines drawn and redrawn, the flies singing their hymnal in procession around the dead, and my father with a ticket to flee because home wouldn't let us stay. Maps of provinces, cities, family lines drawn and redrawn into travelogues and diaries, into stories passed in the night, like my father with a ticket to flee because home wouldn't let us stay. Hum of the plane engine, hum of idling car, hum of the outboard motor, into travelogues and diaries, into stories passed in the night. We were footnotes on a charred parchment, the borders lost to the hum of planes, of idling cars, the hum of outboard motors, because of the way the line on a map twists into thorns. So in 1972, my parents left the Philippines. My uncle was on the blacklist of the Marcos regime. He was blacklisted because he was one of the young college students who were posited as sort of a leftist rebel. And, one of the things that Ferdinand Marcos did back in the day was that he labeled both, political opponents from the left and the right as threats to the regime and threats to democracy. And people were disappearing every day. I think I'm slightly terrified and very triggered about much of what's happening these days, just because of, my past and my family's past. And, I think about how my father is coping, and he's pretty traumatized, having, again, had to bail out his brother from, certain death a couple of times because of, how he was perceived. This is a story based on something that my uncle had told my father about once being captured, and then, subsequently being let free. Nocturne with the general at his study. Deer have nibbled the leaves of the eggplants, creating a fury among the servants who scribble about like herd animals crossing a frozen lake. The false calm of the general is a premonition. His gold-plated revolver, the silence at the end of a parenthesis. In the kitchen, a live bass slaps its tail in a slowly widening tempo. Large mirrors in the study gather in the growing unease. The general coughs. The head chef holds a cleaver to the throat of the prettiest servant. Cream has separated into 2 layers, and the stars have long been overhead. The dead in the deep furrow at the edge of the city with the understanding of night's temperament. Still, there is no protest. The fish will be steamed, and the pretty servant will wear a slight scar above her clavicle. There will be no murders tonight, and the kitchen will gleam respectably out of danger. In the morning, the general will command his servants to build a fence and urinate around the perimeter of the garden. Such is the nature of an easy resolution. Such is the inscrutability of power. So basically, he was sort of bailed out from that situation because my mother's cousin was friends with one of the city officials, and they basically bribed him just to sort of let him out. Anyway, I'm going to read from this book. It's called Post Subject, A Fable. It's a series of epistolary prose poems that are addressed to empire. And this book was written in a series of poems from 2007 to 2013. And what's really weird is how predictive the book has become. So I'll read a couple of poems just to give you sort of a flavor of what was in my head at the time and how it's sort of resonant today. Dear Empire, these are your orators. Shined up, they line amphitheaters with their brilliant stupefactions. A sequence of incongruities streams from their tongues, silvered and rich. Sweet devils, their vowels uncurl in lariats of errata. Every ear can be bought, they say, each price to be named as the globe turns on its hinge. Of course, we must pity the gullible boys whose faces alight like the roundest fluorescence to their silken call. These spectators become your hardiest enervations. From their mislaid memories comes your grasp, come your rhetorical hammers. It's very odd to sort of read that work in light of stuff that's happening. Here's another one. Dear Empire, these are your refugees. The tents they use to cover their heads are made of a soft, translucent fabric. When winds spill from down the mountain, the tents inflate like the sails of a ship. The whole valley is adrift in an arid sea. And when the sun strikes the tents, you see the shadows of the people against the rippling curtains of silk. Here is a family. The silhouette of the mother is turned to one side, then disappears as the walls of the tent fold inward. And here is a child with a ball. Here is an old woman with her back pressed against the walls of cloth, craning her head as though she were listening to music from beyond the camp, as though she were filled with the expectation of water in a very hot month. From the mountains above the camp, the tents are the egg sac of a giant amphibian, the living hearts beating clear in a clutch of embryos. It's really strange to be reading that book in 2020, knowing full well that I had written it back in between 07 and 2014, and just kind of seeing all of this come up. And again, it was one of those collections that I was writing against or at sort of my family past, my familial past. I'm going to change gears, and I'm going to move towards this book, which is The Boy in the Labyrinth. Bob mentioned that it was my newest book. I'm going to read just a couple of pieces from it. My sons are neurodiverse, and one of the things that I have to mention right away is that the point of view of the one poem that I'm going to read from this collection is from the point of view of someone who is neurotypical, particularly a parent, a neurotypical parent, and therefore it is full of flaw and error. And I think that that's important to say, that it is certainly biased, and it is from the perspective of somebody who has an ableist perspective. It does not change the fact, though, that there is love in this poem. So I will read just this one poem. It's called Autism Screening Questionnaire, Abnormal Symbolic or Imaginative Play. And this is based on one of the several autism questionnaires that my wife and I had to fill out. Autism Screening Questionnaire, Abnormal Symbolic or Imaginative Play. Does your child flap his hands, Does he self-stimulate? In ecstatic moments, it is a kind of remembering the body is the body. For example, these arms are for grasping. These hands are capable of holding and touching the known and unknown. And how remarkable it all is, scintillant the way wonder surges toward the filaments. Does he self-mutilate, inflict pain or injury? Huddled close against the soft thrum of rainfall against our roof, and his fingers hook into my eye sockets. It is always this. His fingers seek an empty to fill. Chorus of his nails pressed into my flesh, thrust into the seam of our borders. My body, his pain, our pain. Does he arrange toys in rows? Because design is a prism of the mind, because placement is in relation to, because the polyglot of form needs order, because blue car next to green car next to red car all along the highway, because the serpentine of die-cast metal relentlessly gleams, because form is relentless, relentlessly infinite. Does he focus interest on toy parts, such as car wheels? Every object has a purpose. Every purpose hums its wheel. Plastic tires in close orbits, firestones nearly spun into the eye as if the urge to become the eye was the tire's concern. The idea that the thing could move beyond the membranes of the self to become fully boy. To be sewn into the boy's mind, and having been possessed intensely by the thing, upon the thing cessation, grief. Is he obsessed with objects or topics? The Amanita genus is his favorite and includes the death cap. You will know a death cap by its off-colored patches, the remnants of what was once a veil that had surrounded the mushroom when it was young. We had lived in a place of quiet, surrounded by every manner of fungus, and he would stand in the rain until drenched, looking at the same clump of mushrooms, fairy rings, polypore shelves, sleek and concealed little spore bearers hidden under leaves. Lobes of chanterelles, the coral-like hemispheres of morels, thinking in their darkness. Does he spin objects himself? Is he fascinated with spinning objects? Pinwheels staked along the sidewalk, their abiding gyres a mess of colors. He seems to take them as evidence of the refuge, an embrace behind the eyes, a wild ecstasy trammeled by a center. It hones him in. His being wound down as one winds a clock to take ample measure of what is infinitesimally daunting and thus pulled in by its swirl. Does he have unusual attachment to objects, sticks, stones, strings, hair, etc.? Pocketfuls of stone, chalcedony and pyrite, the milky ghost of quartz, tiger's eye, iron flakes wedged into thin veins, oars reluctantly peering in tentacle-like threads sewn into igneous rhyolite, peppered granites and rounded skipping stones palmed and warm. He'd demand I carry them all in my pockets, all of their weight pressed against my thigh, raucous with each step. Does he have a savant ability or a restricted skill superior to his age group? His mind teems with magical thought, the possibilities of every moment. If the clock were a cicada winding down, if the rain were an unfurled scroll of lost voices, if the sky held all the animals everyone had loved, then the absolutes holding us here with our grief are not sovereign. That this alchemy, scratched with debris and errata, these waves sweeping our houses loose from their pilings, all of it soluble in the swirling cacophony of his mind. All right, I'm going to read a couple from this book, Requiem for the Orchard. So I was raised in Eastern Oregon, which is on the border of Oregon and Idaho. And it was really kind of a rough place to grow up. There was not a whole lot to do. And I don't know if you remember way back when the Bundy family, or is it the Bundy or the Bundin? Bundy family sat themselves on some federal land and hung on to it. Well, where I grew up was maybe like 60 miles from that spot. Anyway, this is a poem about small towns, namely small towns in Eastern Oregon, namely one specific small town in Eastern Oregon. In defense of small towns. When I look at it, it's simple, really. I hated life there. September once filled with animal deaths and toughened hay, and the smells of fall were boiled down beets and potatoes, or the farmhands' breeches smeared with oil and diesel as they rode into town dusty and pissed. The radio station split time between Metal and Tejano, and the only action happened on Friday nights where the high school football team gave everyone a chance at forgiveness. The town left no room for novelty or change. And the sheriff knew everyone's son, and despite that, we'd cruise up and down the avenues, switching between brake and gear shift. We'd fight and spit chew into big gulp cups and have our hearts broken nightly. In that town, I learned to fire a shotgun at 9 and wring a chicken's neck with one hand by twirling the bird and whipping it straight like a towel. But I loved the place once. Everything was blonde and cracked, and the irrigation ditches stretched to the end of the earth. You could ride on a bicycle and see clearly the outline of every leaf, or catch on the streets each word of a neighbor's argument. Nothing could happen there, and if I willed it, the place would have me slipping over its rocks into the river with the sugar plant's steam, or signing papers at a storefront army desk buttoned up with medallions and a crew cut, eyeing the next recruits. If I've learned anything, it's that I could be anywhere, staring at a hunk of asphalt or listening to the clap of billiard balls against each other in a bar and hear my name. Indifference now? Some. I shook loose. But that isn't the whole story. The fact is, I'm still in love. And when I wake up, I watch my son yawn, and my mind turns his upswept hair into corn stalks at the edge of a field. Stillness is an acre, and his body idles deep like heavy machinery. I want to take him back there, to the small town of my youth, and hold the book of wildflowers open for him and look. I want him to know the colors of horses, to run with a cattail in his hand and watch as its seeds fly weightless, as though nothing mattered, as though the little things we tell ourselves about our pasts stay there, rising slightly and just out of reach. I'll read one more poem from here and one new poem, and move on. Back in Washington State, when we lived there, we lived on property that was adjacent to Department of Natural Resources land. So we bought this property adjacent to this 40-acre plot, and not 1 year passed when the Department of Natural Resources decided to clear cut it. So we were really pissed off. We were so mad. So they basically clear cut all this forest behind our house. But, you know, something miraculous happened. So this is a poem about that. Meditation with Smoke and Flowers. It is Monday, and I'm not thinking of myself, my son asleep in his stroller, the dark conifers holding nothing but their scent. I'm walking him to the place where loggers have cleared 30 acres, leaving only ash and stripped tree limbs. The light now comes to the places once dark, and now wildflowers, where once the moss grew thick and complete. The flame of something around the corner, and I'm thinking of the wild tiger lilies that line this gravel road below my house, how they clump together, their stems bent down from the weight of their flowers, how mouth-like they are, and how their speechlessness makes the road quieter. Each flower is a surprise, like the flaming tip of cigarettes in the dark. I think that the road cannot contain all these mouths, though there are mythologies held in check by the tongue. Like the story my father told me about his father in wartime, and how his own father forced him with the threat of a beating to go under the house for a cigarette from a Japanese foot soldier bunkered down. I can see my father's small, trembling hand outstretched to this man whose face is mud-caked, smelling slightly of fire and lubricant for his rifle. The smoke from the soldier's own cigarette takes the shape of the underside of the house, and I imagine my father can hear his own father above him pacing. But this road now is free of smoke. The logging trucks have taken off for the night, and the tree remnants have smoldered into nothing but charcoal. The wreck of everything is a vacuum. So too, the wreck of a village after war, or the floorboards above a son's head in fear of his own father. Here, though, there is nothing to fear. The wheels of the stroller on gravel is the only sound, and the idleness of the excavation trucks hearkens to someone asleep in the uneasy dark. No, I'm not thinking of myself. I'm thinking of an agreement my father must have made with himself years ago, when the houses were burning into bright bouquets in the nighttime. Perhaps he swore he would not beat his own son, while somewhere in the afterlife, his own father smokes and paces. Perhaps there are no flowers in that place. Perhaps the lone soldier, through with hiding, crawled out after the guns had stopped and dusted himself off, the sun striking his face with its unreasonable light. I'm thinking of my son, asleep, and of the wild tiger lilies, how frail they are in the new light, why they come, why they spring up unannounced, as suddenly as the promises we make with ourselves when we are young. Thank you. And I'm going to close with one of my newer poems, and I have to decide which one it is. Not that one. I wish I had a plan. I have a poor plan. Okay, here we go. This is one from a series of poems that are broken sonnets, I would say. You know, the poet Wanda Coleman from Los Angeles was actually one of my teachers, and she was a practitioner of what she would call the American sonnets. She was a really tough teacher, but I learned a hell of a lot from her. Anyway, I would consider these one of these broken sonnets in homage to Wanda Coleman. Diaspora Sonnet 55. Broth of boiled cloth and acid hands, knuckles raw from wringing suds and swinging denim by fistfuls up and out of the basin. Grime of steam and grease stains blotted out, rows of hangers on garment conveyors marching, shirt after shirt, garnished in plastic in the heat from the press to flatten out collars and sleeves. In a different country, I might have been royalty. That glow of my skin in the heat, a hidden seal on an envelope. I live in a republic of hangers. I let the fabrics warm my blistered skin. I let the presses rejoice in silks and the seersucker blazer. Inside the roar of the dryer, I can shout my name, perfect, sequined, and neatly pressed. Thank you all.
Thank you, Oliver. That was wonderful. So
Thank
so many very moving poems there. Want to open it up for questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one.
Hey, Oliver.
Hey, Jody.
So I don't know if this is going to be embarrassing, but so the first book of yours I read was Names Above Houses. And I almost think of it as a partner to your latest book in a way. So I found Names Above Houses, I guess. I see a contrast between kind of flight and I guess the labyrinth, because I think most of the work in The Boy in the Labyrinth is set in a labyrinth. And I was curious if you could say something about, I guess, your trajectory from first to last book, and whether like there was sort of this, how would I put it? Yeah, whether that contrast was kind of conscious in your mind.
Thanks, Jody, for that question. I like to sort of change things up every time I write a book, but I think that I can't help but sometimes go back to certain patterns or motifs that I rely on. And one of the motifs or patterns that I always rely on is the parable. And both, Names Above Houses and The Boy in the Labyrinth operate on the level of parable. They tell these parable-like stories or fabulous stories. That has a lot to do with what I read and how I read, various ideas of my history. I think that the reason why the parable is easy for me and might draw parallels between, say, 3 of my books, I think, is because of my embrace of the prose poem form. And I think that because of my embrace of the prose poem form, it sort of calls these particular motifs of myth and this kind of language, the language of myth, to inform the content. I didn't consciously think of Names Above Houses, though, when I was writing The Boy in the Labyrinth. I was thinking of ways to articulate my feelings of being a parent to a child of neurodiversity without having the language to do it. And what ended up happening is I reverted to a mode that I was comfortable with, right? The parable, right? So in a lot of ways, I found that the parable structure was instructive to my process into writing towards that last book. I don't know if I answered your question, Jody, but I mean, I think that I see the the parallels now, but I think that, the parallels were a function of me writing myself out of a place of mystery.
Thank you.
Any other?
Another question for Oliver?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful reading. It was remarkable, especially to hear those poems about your son. Thank you for that. I am wondering if you can actually tell me a little bit about the poets that you have on your syllabi at Holy Cross. What do you have your students read?
Well, okay, so I can show you one book that I'm going to be teaching in the fall, and it's this book. It's called Odes to Lithium. It's by Shira Ehrlichman.
Oh,
Shira
wonderful.
Ehrlichman is a neurodiverse writer. She is writing and also, you know, drawing. You know, I mean, it's really an exciting book because it's multimodal. So part of our discussion is talking about how this poet, this neurodiverse poet, you know, engages multiple modes to articulate her interiority and why that's important. And, you know, I think, yeah, that's one. There's another book by Monica Sook, which has not arrived yet, but I'm going to be teaching Monica's book, which is about her experience as an immigrant from, she's Cambodian, I can't remember. But those are two books that are on the syllabus for the fall.
That's great. Shira used to be part of a local poetry scene called the Poets Asylum.
Yeah.
And so some of us on the call have got to hear her read when she was just new to poetry.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting that now her work is being shared as part of your class.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm really excited to teach it. Yeah. Anything else?
Maybe this was asked earlier. I've been on mute because my kids are very lively. One thing I wonder about is how, no, oh, okay, sweetie, I'll be right back. With life being as it is for us all, how are you balancing, you know, the parenting self, the writing self, the teaching self? Just what has that been like for you? Any part of that you feel like talking about? And if you don't feel like talking about some of it, you get it.
Hey, Jung, thanks for the question. How have I been balancing all of those aspects of my life? The answer is very poorly. Not at all. You know, normally I write in the summer. I spend a lot of time writing in the summer, and my kids are in camp, any camp that we can afford. So that gives my spouse and I some time to sort of work on us. We haven't had any of that time, and you know what? I mean, we're okay with that. I mean, that's as long as everybody's healthy and safe, it's okay. I haven't been beating myself up too much about that. You know what I mean? I'm frustrated. I'm annoyed a lot, but I think that you know, everybody in my circle is safe and healthy, and I think that that's going to be what I ride with out of this, right? That's number one. But you know, I mean, it's really about trying to decide what you prioritize, and right now my priority is making sure that the kids are okay and that you know, everybody's healthy and happy. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer. I wish I had a better answer for you, Hey Jung, and I understand and I see what's happening in your house, but
Yes.
I've been there.
Yes. No, I feel like for me, it's sort of just lower expectations everywhere.
Yep.
I'd seen it was a reading on like Poets in Pajamas. They're like, we're all being creative in our survival. I keep going back to that. We're all being creative in our survival. And that is kind of, that's the thing. And then everything else comes later. So. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, you know, I mean, I think one of the other things that I've been doing is I've been redirecting my creativity to working with my hands. I've been gardening a lot.
I've been gardening a lot, and I've been taking walks every day. And Nadine has seen my tomatoes, and she needs to take some tomatoes from me. But I mean, I think, I think that the garden has been sort of my creative outlet in a lot of ways. It's not writing. It's hard for me to really focus on reading and anything like that. So.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for sharing the new work, especially.
Yeah. Thanks. Hey, John. So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Therese, did you have a question? I thought you unmuted yourself for a second.
I did. I was just second that emotion. It's just really hard. I've been struggling too with 3 kids and doing my MFA and trying to carve out time to write and read without interruptions, which just isn't happening. So, but it is happening, but it's, it's like building the airplane as you fly it. So,
sure.
I have a question though, now that I have the floor. So when did you start writing?
Oh, so I have written since I was little, like since I was maybe like 5 years old, just out of a sheer need to have some kind of mode of expression, but also like I was bored because it wasn't, I mean, I was raised in Eastern Oregon. There was nothing there. There's nothing to do. So, I read a lot and I wrote a lot. But I think I took it seriously, right? Like I really took it seriously, probably my undergraduate at Loyola Marymount when I had some really good teachers who prompted me and urged me. Wanda was one of them, actually. She kicked my butt and she was really hard on me. And I mean, I wasn't her favorite student. That was okay, but I learned from that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yep.
Sometimes the hardest teachers are the ones you get the most from.
Oh yeah, we didn't see eye to eye, and that was okay. I mean, I think that I think that her resistance to my work was really kind of motivation in a lot of ways. But now I understand it. Now I get it. Yeah.
We also had a question come through the chat, again from Heather, who apologizes for her audio. She asked, do you have a favorite form that you enjoy working with? And do you write in any other genres?
I write essays poorly because I have the attention span of a poet. I can't. I just like, well, but I do write lyric essays. If I do write another genre, it's a lyric essay. I am going to try my hand at, Kidlit, just because it's fun. But right now I'm mostly poetry / lyric essay. My favorite form that I write in, I would have to say that my favorite is both the prose poem, my prose poems, and I like sonnets, and I can write in the traditional form, but I like breaking rules. So that's what I like.
Can I ask another question? Just regarding prose poem versus lyric essay, where do you draw the line? Like, how do you know when it's an essay and when it's a prose poem? Or do you just make...
Do I have to draw the line?
No, I think you just decide what you want to call it. But
yeah.
I've been experimenting with that myself, and it's kind of like, it kind of depends on what you decide, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that can often be helpful both ways, right? You can determine that you're going to do a piece of writing and not place a judgment on it and allow it to be what it wants to be, either a prose poem sonnet or a prose poem, short, or a lyric essay. Or you can sort of impose a particular type of genre form on it, and that could also be something that helps you be generative. Really depends, right? But sometimes operating in one way or another, I tend to just write out in patterns and shapes and boxes, and then determine what things are going to become later.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I ask one more, Oliver? I was thinking, you used the phrase about articulating interiority,
Yes.
right? And I wondered that, do you feel like in your different books, is the interiority being articulated in a different way? Or do you feel like it's kind of all, there's that sense of there's a unity of a writer coming out of a single mind, right? But then there's also like kind of, I feel like books are sometimes like prisms, or
Sure.
there's sort of moments captured at the time. So I'm just curious about what you found in terms of articulating. Okay, Calvin, I'm going to take care of you right now. And I'm going to stop my question there.
Okay, so I hope he gets his orange balloon. That's first and foremost. In terms of articulating interiority, this idea of interiority. So I'm constantly in the process of being me, right? And I want to stress this idea of process, that like one's interior space or one's interiorness is constantly changing. I can honestly say that the first 2 books that I've written, I don't think I can write those books now. I'm not the same person. I'm not at all. I think this last book that I wrote, The Boy in the Labyrinth, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do that again, knowing what I know, right? Like that book was written in a space when I was still searching and I was looking for answers. Now I'm in a space where, oh, well, I've written this thing and there are some things that I'm just not comfortable with anymore, right? There's some things about my relationship with my children and what I know about neurodiversity now that I just can't repeat. I can't do this again. And in fact, like, you know, when I read from that book, I always have to sort of position myself as who I am, as someone who is neurotypical and who has written this work that is deeply flawed, right? And I have to articulate that. So I'm not that person that first wrote that book. I'm not the same person. I know a little bit more. I'm a little bit more understanding, and it also means it doesn't mean that I'm also not in the process of learning more. So, you know, I think that each book is a monument of a me at a particular time, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining today.
Thank you
Thank you,
all.
Oliver, for reading such powerful poetry to us. And I hope to see some of you at our poetry picnic on the 23rd. You can always check worcestercountypoetry.org for any upcoming virtual events. And when we get back to the real world, our in-person events as well. So, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, thanks so much.